I'm not saving lives, but I've learned over the years how to make my formula work, and now it just becomes easier, and the technology has allowed me to do it a lot faster.
How difficult is it for you at this level and at this point in your career when the average R&B singer now is probably like 18 and singing over basically hip-hop tracks?
Yeah. I think that the hard part now, as I get older, is obviously competing against the next 18-year-old, whoever that is. You want to continue to be able to sell to the kids because they're the ones that run out to the record stores first. Adults are a little more jaded, but I think that I've been fortunate that when I came out, I had those people who were my age that liked me and people who were a little older than them. So we've all sort of grown up together and moved on. And then my music has gotten younger as I've gotten older. And I think that was a good thing too. So I've gotten the next generation of kids now. And as long as I continue to try to think about all of those people in that demographic when I'm making a record, it's okay. I think it would be difficult now to make the album I made first. Now. I'd have to make this kind of record I make now, and then later on in my career make the other way, which is usually the way it happens. When my first record came out, I wanted to prove that you didn't have to be 35 to be a musician and to talk about things that adults talk about. And I think that if I made a conscious decision to do it now, it would be very different at that age. But you have to realize back then, it was singers and then hip-hop artists. Now, it's hip-hop artists, and you might throw some singers in there every now and then, so the tables have sort of turned a lot with that. But being an established artist, I think I get a little more light then. It's very difficult for new artists that are really trying to make that happen.
I mean, it's just so interesting because I just I wrote a piece on a new group coming out called Kindred, the husband and wife duo, and I was basically did the piece under the idea that this is grown folks music.
Right.
Is there something? It seems like now though there's something wrong if you make grown folks music.
I heard a quote today that made sense to me. I'm going to start using it. It's okay to be grown because grown doesn't necessarily mean growing old. So that's the fine line you have to walk down. I mean, at some point, it's so funny we were talking about 44, 45-year-old people running around in FUBU and Fat Farm and still in the club sweating up their clothes and stuff, which isn't bad if that's what you're trying to do, but at some point you have to sort of evaluate where you are in your life and moving on to that next stage of your life. So it's really interesting to see how things have sort of turned around the last 15 years and being a part of it.
As you get older, is it as easy to write for younger people? Because you've obviously been through more life experience. You've been married, now
Right.
not married. All those kinds of things would make your songwriting, I would think, more mature than that would appeal to a 20-something.
Well, the difference is that I don't necessarily write about complex issues. I write about moments in time that I think that we all go through, no matter how old you are. We've all wanted to meet somebody, and we've all wanted to be with somebody. We've all wanted someone else to like us. We've all been in a situation where we've been hurt or hurt somebody else. So when you look at it from that standpoint, I never try to talk over my audience or under my audience. I try to meet them right where their need is. And I don't think that you can really put an age on that necessarily. Even if it's puppy love at 12, or if it's, your first real love in high school, or your first couple of years of college, it's all that same feeling. You just may not know what it is because you have indigestion or something. Be able to work it out quite. You haven't quite figured it out. And I don't think we ever really quite figure it out, and that's the beauty of it.
What's more frightening, sitting down to a blank sheet of paper or going out on stage?
Well, I never ever write any of this down. The very first time I see my lyrics is after I finish a song. I have an assistant in the studio who's there writing the lyrics as I sing. And once I see him, then I'm like, is that the way I kind of did? Okay, and then okay, it makes sense. That's the first time it makes sense for me. I can't read off a lyric sheet because it sounds like I'm reading. I usually sing one takes. There's no going back and fixing things. So that part isn't that difficult. I learned to sing in front of people.
So, okay, wait. So when you write a song, no, because you know what, this is interesting, because you're saying basically that you write the song in your mind and then you sort of sing it?
What happens is when I wake up in the morning, on a typical day, I'm working on 4 or 5 things in my head as I go to the gym or as I do this, as I do that. And all throughout the day, if something pokes its head up, I'm working on that in my head. I'm singing those lyrics. I'm going over those melodies in my head. If I get back to the house, I'll pick up a guitar. I have a guitar in every room in my house. Where I'll watch TV and I'll work out the ideas. Basically, I know the song before I record it. So by the time I get to the studio, I know what I want to do. I do all the music first. I play the instruments. I get all that down. Get a skeleton enough to where I can then sing all the vocals down. Once I have the vocals, that's the core of what I do. I can always fix the other stuff around what I've said, but it's kind of difficult to match what you say to something that you've already done when you don't have anything. And then when it's all done, I mean, in one night, no more than 3-4 hours, it's done. I look back at it. My system writes out the lyrics. I check it off that it's cool, and we move on to the next thing the next day.
And I think this is the right word. Isn't that autodidactic? Isn't that what that is?
It's really a routine that
Okay.
I've patented for myself to
Okay.
challenge myself to continue to try to come up with these things. I think that if I was sitting around, I would forget. If I wrote something down, I wrote it out, the next time I came back to it, it wouldn't have the same newness to it. So as I move it through the day, it just sort of comes out, and eventually by 8 o'clock my engineer knows I'm coming with something new. And if I don't have anything to do, I don't go. I try to live my life throughout the day, throughout the week, where I can draw that inspiration out, and then I go to the studio. And today it might just be nonsensical. It may be deep. It may be philosophical. Who knows? I don't know. God has blessed me with the talent to be able to come up with these things, and I don't question them. I become the medium, if you're into that kind of thing, and then it sort of just comes out.
That's interesting, then, because I think Jay-Z does exactly the same thing.
I heard that today, too.
Yeah. See, people would not think that Brian McKnight and Jay-Z have something in common,
Right.
necessarily.
Right.
Approaching this album, it seemed as though there were a lot of different styles or a lot of different flavors. Was that something conscious, or was that just, as you said, going through your life and feeling different ways and doing different things?
It's a tough thing to do when you're doing it all yourself, to not repeat yourself. And I think the conscious decision was a threefold. One, let's change the tempos. Let's not have anything that's so close that when you're moving in and out, you end up having the same sort of monotonal sort of situation happening. I wrote 50 songs for this album, which is what I usually do. I just write and write and write and write, and then something inside me says, you know what, I think it's ready. And then I poke my head up and I call the people in that I trust to tell me whether I got it or not, and then we fix 1 or 2 things and we're done. And when we cut that 50 to 20, that's when the work started. Those last 7 songs, because I truly believe that you cannot keep them more than an hour. Not at one time. And for me, for people to be able to put it on and you listen from beginning to end, then you have to come up with a sequence that works, so that you can go through your life, through your day, and you can weave through these songs, and by the end of the day, you've gone through your emotions, which is what we all do. We get up, we shower, whatever we have to do. We get up, go to work. You may be yelling at this guy on the freeway. You're late. You're doing this. You got a boss that's screaming at you. You got this and that. You're going through all these things. And I tried to create a musical sort of score for your life on an everyday basis. And looking at it that way, it couldn't all be the same, but it couldn't all be so drastically different that you ran into a problem there. So I tried to just have a really concentric sort of situation happen.
When you're an artist who's pampered, who's maybe a little spoiled, not doing the 9-to-5 thing necessarily, going from the studio to the concert stage, the video shoot, to all that, how do you tap into sort of the real life that is relatable to all those other people that do that in the world?
I think that starts with your upbringing and having the right people around you that will never let you lose sight of where you've come from. And I never want to think that I've changed so much that I've lost sight of those things. My children make that really possible for me because they're real. Unlike other things I've seen, they haven't really been affected that much by any of this. I think that the great part was that I had them before this started. At least BJ anyway. Nico came a little after that, but still grew up with it. And because they understood it from the very beginning, they couldn't be affected that much by it. So when you look at it in those terms, when your family is always there to sort of keep you on the right track. My mother always, she doesn't care. I mean, she would never let me lose sight of those things. And I think that because I've stayed so close to them, I think a lot of times when you have those kind of people, they're very much detached from those areas of their life. My very strict church upbringing keeps that sort of level groundedness inside. But it's a moment in time. You know, some people may meet you this minute. They think you're the worst, arrogant so-and-so that ever walked the face of the earth. And then the next minute, this other person may meet you. They think you're the greatest, most down-to-earth person on the face of the earth, too. So it's tough. I can only be me. And if I'm cranky this minute, you're probably going to know, like every other person in the world. And if I'm happy and cool and comfortable with you, then you know that too. So I stopped trying to please everybody a long time ago.
You worked with Kirk Franklin on this album.
Right.
Although you talked about the straight church upbringing, you haven't done a whole lot of foray into gospel. Why did you choose Kirk, and particularly to deliver the message on this song? And you can talk a little bit about it.
Right. The song is called "One of the Ones Who Did," and I didn't really, when I wrote this song, I wasn't really thinking of the deepness of an impending war and all sorts of things, but I was thinking more about where we are in terms of the Bible and the chronology of what's happening in Revelation. We're in the middle of at the end of Revelation now. If you believe the way that I believe, and I know that a lot of these things have to happen before Christ can come back to claim us. So when you look at it from that perspective, people say, well, what do you think about this war? And I'm kind of torn, because on the one hand, I don't want there to be loss of life. I don't want these things to happen. But that's kind of like telling God that I'm not ready yet for him to come back, even though I know these things are supposed to happen. So there's a real cacophony there between myself and what I believe, and, you know, how I feel for the people in this country, and, you know, our troops and all those sorts of things. But, you know, all my life I've been hearing the fire and brimstone preachers talk about this time period, and it's kind of interesting. But I wrote this song about where we are in relation to that, and if you're ready, and when Jesus comes, you want to be one of the ones that does make it, because I know there's going to be a lot of people, even people that believe they're going to go to heaven when he comes back, that won't make it. But I wanted to say that I would be willing to do whatever it took to get there, and I think that the only person that would be able to validate that for me would be Kirk, considering all the rest of the stuff on the record. I know a lot of times people, they think that the two don't cross.
The sacred and the profane?
Yeah. And it's interesting, because I don't know any person, even people that go to church on a regular basis, that don't love somebody and don't want to be loved, and that don't have sex at some point and do all those sorts of things. And I'm sure they're not singing "Shall We Gather at the River" when they're about to, you know, lay down with their spouse. So at the same